Ladies and gentlemen, Todd Wider, Jed Wider.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. We greatly appreciate it. We have a special guest with us here today. Would like to bring down the real hero of the day, Jen McNary. Jen's two boys, Austin and Max, are up there as well. We're very, very happy that they're here today.
Questions, please? Anyone? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, ma'am. The question was, why hasn't Charlie been able to get on the drug?
So the other boys in the film have a mutation specifically that works with that drug. My two sons, Max and Austin, and the other boys. Charlie has a mutation that needs a follow-on drug. It's an exon 50 drug. Unfortunately, because Sarepta is such a small biotech company and we just now received accelerated approval, the drug company hasn't been able to move on to that specific drug. The populations get smaller and smaller, so Charlie's still waiting.
Yes, ma'am.
How did you first become acquainted with the story, and what made you think that this would help?
How did you become acquainted with the story, and how did you think this would help?
I was at a benefit, benefit fundraiser in New York City several years ago. I was invited by a friend of mine, and I went, and I was sitting at a table with probably 1,000 people in the audience, and people were drinking and eating, and I sat there listening to Benji Seckler, talking about his son Charlie, the efforts that they were making, that Benji and Tracy were making at that point, to try to save their son's life, and I was very, very moved. And I went home that night in a taxi cab back to my apartment, and I started to Google Benji and Tracy and listened to a TED Talk on the way home. The next day I reached out to both of them to try to meet, and we met several days later. They came down from Great Barrington. I went up from New York City, and we began to talk. My brother and I began to talk with them and spend a lot of time with them. And it was from there, actually, that we were introduced to Jen, and we were introduced to Mindy, and we were also introduced to the McSherrys as well. And that's how the film began for us.
More questions? Up in the back there.
So,
Why hasn't the FDA approved the drug for every child?
one thing we've learned is that government agencies don't make a whole lot of sense. But to answer that question, it is approved. It's approved under an accelerated approval, which means that the drug company still has to create more proof because it was approved on such a small amount of kids. So kids around the country do have access, but we're experiencing issues with insurance coverage because of the type of approval that it is. So there are still many kids that don't get it. It is an expensive drug, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Three-part question.
my cousin. So about 1 in 3,500 to 1 in 5,000. CDC is unsure, but somewhere in there. Sorry, how many kids have this disease? Why do they have this disease? And how much does it cost to treat it with this drug? Yeah? Okay. So how much does it cost? It's about $300,000 for a small kid with Duchenne to be treated. It's a weight-based dosing. And how did they get this disease? That's a really tough one. I'm not a doctor. My kids, I have 2 boys with it. I have a healthy son also, and I don't carry it. So I suppose we should be doing a little more looking into it. But I won the genetic lottery, I suppose. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. I'm not sure how you get muscular dystrophy.
Yes, sir.
Having grown up on Jerry Lewis telephones, what was the MDA, Muscular Dystrophy Association of America's contribution to this process, or what's their stand in this process?
What's the MDA's stand on this process?
Is this being recorded? Not much. I think it was mentioned during the film, and it stands to still be true that it was the rogue moms that pushed this through, and we had very little interaction or help or support from larger organizations.
These mothers really drove the train, forcing the FDA to deal with them and this disease. And, they really, you guys really did this. I don't think that the drug would be in the situation it's in if it hadn't been for you, for the 4 of you, frankly. And it just shows that if you bring attention to an issue and you bang your feet and scream enough, you can get people's attention. To me, this is similar to the AZT and AIDS situation, 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago now, where you had advocates out there and pushing the FDA. It's a smaller set number of people, but it's a similar type of movement, I think, that happened. They descended upon Washington. There were hundreds of people for the advisory panel, right? Hundreds of kids in wheelchairs, and it moved them. And I think part of what the FDA needs to do going forward is to accommodate and be aware of people, human beings that are suffering, I think that's part of what their mandate should be. And to look at anecdotal evidence and to look at people and to accept that these are not numbers on pieces of paper. Don't have 10 people evaluate a drug, none of whom have any idea of a history of practice of neurology. Have people evaluating a neurologic drug that practice neurology or pediatric neurology. Don't have a cardiologist examine a neurology drug. That's ridiculous. Right. So those types of changes need to happen, I think. Sorry. I was just saying that we're hoping that this film will spur changes in the way that the FDA hopefully deals going forward with certain types of orphan diseases like this one, where you would hope that more expert people would be brought in to examine whether a drug is efficacious or not. People that have specific expertise in the field that the drug treats. You had one examiner who had been trained as an ophthalmologist, right? And an ophtho resident who was sort of the lead examiner.
Well, one of the things that we did to change the opinions of the reviewers was to bring in, as you saw, world-renowned experts. And if a group of moms can contact the guy who invented this mechanism of action and fly him in from Perth, Australia, there's no reason that the FDA can't seek opinions from these experts. And so I think that really was the end result, is that we weren't the experts, but we were the experts on our kids. But we thought that they should be seeking the opinions of those that knew the disease.
The advisory panel that was convened actually voted against the drug being approved in a very contentious, which we filmed, contentious, extremely emotional hearing. And it was surreal watching this, because they were almost getting guidance not to vote, from different sources. It was I would say surreal is the best word to sort of describe that, right? But what wound up happening down the line is Janet Woodcock overruled their decision. And so the drug did get conditional approval. But
She's a good woman.
Yeah. But and again, it's these moms that I think really drove this train. So.
We have a question from Twitter. How are the boys that are on the drug doing now?
It's a great question. So I have 2 of them. So what we saw was a plateau in the progression of the disease. So the kids actually got better for a while, and then they stabilized, and what we've seen is a slowed progression. This is not a cure. The sad part is we did all of this, and it's just a treatment. You know, we're still going to need a cocktail of drugs. However, Max is 15 and a half, and he still can walk. 10 of the 12 boys in the original study are still walking. We're seeing the younger boys that are starting on this drug earlier are looking like they never had the disease. I heard that a 9-month-old was dosed, so we may see kids that are asymptomatic. Austin just graduated high school. He can still put his hand above his head. Oh, there you go. He's a very independent boy. He breathes independently, which for Duchenne is unusual at almost 19 years old. So how are the boys doing? They're doing tremendously better. And new drugs, this Sarepta Therapeutics is actually already starting on a next generation drug, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah. Is there any way
We're
for the
working on
general
that.
public
We're
to see
working
the
on that
movie?
currently. It will be out there soon, I think, you know, either on television or Netflix or Amazon.
Sir, right here, yeah. Yes. What are the plans for the film?
So this is the world premiere of the film. We plan to take this film out to other film festivals around the world. And then, as Todd said, we've started the process of looking for a broadcast and certainly for a online distribution, either on Netflix or Amazon.
Yes. Who in Congress is helping you?
You know what? We actually had a bipartisan support. I couldn't even name them all, but if you look me up, I will send you a list of who signed on to our letters. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, basically anything, and I can send you a list because, you know, you saw Senator Warren was amazing, my home state, but we had nobody that said no.
Elliot Engel, Marco Rubio gave an amazing speech on the Senate floor about this.
This was really something that the entire Hill embraced eventually after we got through some of the staffers.
We have time for a couple more. Yes, over here. Is there anything that we could do for the fight?
I think look up Charlie's Fund. Tracy and I are continuing to work together on creating drug trials, early clinical research. This has been a lasting friendship, although we met through this. These guys actually sort of introduced us. And she's also working on access issues for those kids that can't get access. So supporting Charlie's Fund is a really great way to help.
Right here. How were you able to deal with the financial hardships of it?
We still live in that 2-bedroom condo. I mean, it's a struggle, but it's priorities. Austin has a job now. He helps.
Yes, sir.
You know, I think if you had asked any parent who had wanted to get on the Sarepta trial if they were willing to indemnify the company for any adverse effects that the drug might have, which it didn't, they all would have said, yes, where can we sign? So the issue wasn't one of liability with respect to the company, it was one of process. It was one of the FDA process.
There wasn't enough drug. So there was only enough drug to start 12 boys on this study. And so in order to start making enough money to produce more drug, there had to be some sort of revenue or approval. And this is, again, a process that we learned about. But absolutely, we talked about, could we make this stuff in our kitchen? Somebody suggested at one point we could, use some sort of filter and filter Max's urine to make the drug for Austin. We looked at all the options. There wasn't another one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you very much.